My name is Per Becker, and I'm Associate Professor in Risk and Safety at Lund University in Sweden. I have been looking forward to this conference for some time now, and hope my presentation will contribute to the exciting knowledge exchange that this promising conference program suggests. Thanks to the organizers for facilitating for us to meet, and for allowing me this opportunity to present my research.
Flood risk is a great global concern that is not only affecting developing countries, but threatens to undermine sustainable development also in the most affluent advanced liberal democracies. While political inertia is delaying much needed global change, efforts to reduce risk and adapt to a changing climate are growing on more local levels. However, floods tend not to be bounded by geopolitical, administrative, organizational, or other socially constructed borders. This requires flood risk to be jointly governed by networks of actors across them. The patterns of social relations among these actors are fundamental for societal's capacity to reduce risk, and influential voices argue the importance of fit between the biophysical basis of the issue requiring governing and the institutional arrangements of actors engaging in its governance. This study investigates this problem of fit in the governing of flood risk mitigation, based on a case study of flood risk mitigation in Höje catchment area in southern Sweden, where human activity has profoundly altered catchment hydrology over the last 2 centuries. The selected catchment area comprises 316 square kilometers divided in 3 hydrologically relevant and rapidly developing municipalities, Lomma, Lund, and Staffanstorp, where upstream activity affect flood risk downstream. This level of analysis delineates the issue of flood risk hydrologically and the network of actors governing flood risk functionally, allowing for the inclusion of actors across horizontal and vertical boundaries as long as they contribute to the governing of flood risk mitigation in the catchment area. Applying a single case study research design with multiple embedded units of analysis, the study draws on a unique dataset comprising 217 interviews with all individual formal actors actively engaged in flood risk mitigation in the catchment area, as well as maps, legislation, policies, court rulings, strategies, plans, and consultation minutes. It integrates structural and interpretive analysis, since the roles of actors are defined both by their social relations and by the institutional context they are embedded into. The results suggest an evident problem of fit between the hydrology of the catchment area and the institutional arrangements governing flood risk mitigation within it. Even when it is obvious that water flows downwards in the landscape across whatever borders, there are rifts in the governing of flood risk mitigation both between the municipalities constituting Höje catchment area and within each municipality itself. So the fragmentation in the flood risk governance that I have identified, first of all, runs along the municipal borders. What municipalities do upstream is heavily influencing the flood risk of municipalities downstream, but there is no connection in between, more or less. The little connections there are not changing anything in how they deal with flood risk. There is a fragmentation between the municipal borders and the administrative levels above, where the national level is not providing the guidelines necessary for the municipal administrations to mitigate flood risk. This is from the perspective of the municipal administrations, of course. The regional level is not engaged in the coordination between municipalities. There is fragmentation within the municipalities between different professional groups. And these professional groups are implementing tightly coupled policies that demand close interaction, but this interaction is not happening. It's happening between the planners and the water and sewage engineers, but not the third group, the people who are dealing with risk and vulnerability assessments and other instruments that are intended to assist in producing a safe and sustainable situation in the municipalities. There is a fragmentation in rainfall intensity or in how the actors are addressing different rainfall intensities. The water and sewage organizations are only responsible for dealing with rainfall intensities up to the intensity that happens once in 10 years statistically, which is called the 10-year rainfall. For any rainfall that are more intense, it's the general responsibility of the municipality. So all the infrastructure is focusing on a rainfall intensity that is bound to happen more often in the future with climate change. There is fragmentation also within the municipality in how flood risk mitigation is assessed and implemented. So if a landowner has a piece of land that they want to develop, they apply to the municipal administration to have a detailed development planning process started. The landowner has to fund assessments of flood risk within that particular area, and they do not assess how any changes in this area affect neighboring areas. Which means that if you assess your own area and you find that flood risk is too high, if you do something to reduce flood risk by, for instance, raising the minimum level of building a house from sea level, you may push water somewhere else, and this is not assessed in the current situation. There's also fragmentation in the different consultants that are involved in the planning processes. So there could be the different consultants within the same area of expertise involved at different points in time, which also is fragmenting knowledge and expertise about flood risk in the area. All these different aspects of fragmentation is undermining society's capacity to mitigate flood risk and hence potentially increasing future flood risk. So I've come up with some solutions and I've structured them according to these different challenges. So first, it's possible to apply the current procurement regulations more strategically to try to give consultants bigger chunks of work and perhaps have similar groups of consultants dealing with assessments in different planning areas. It's possible not only to assess flood risk within each detailed planning area, but instead we need to assess flood risk on a more comprehensive area that follows the hydrological boundaries. Each urban area has different sub-catchment areas where all rainfall within one area will eventually end up in the same place. That is a more logical, hydrologically logical way of assessing flood risk, not focusing on political or land ownership boundaries that are not particularly significant concerning hydrology. We need to stop focusing on this division of this 10-year rainfall. The 10-year rainfall doesn't mean anything from now on into the future. With the climate change happening, that particular rainfall intensity may happen every 5 years or every 7 years or whatever. We cannot divide the entire management of flood risk on an artificial boundary like that. We need to connect policy areas within municipal administrations. We cannot have policy requirements unfulfilled, but each group of stakeholders do that are supposed to feed into the other processes. That just has to be done. We need to coordinate over municipal borders. It cannot be that one municipality will drain a lot of their land and just push it into a river and increase flood risk downstream. We will have to try to think more holistically. And we need to engage the regional level in doing that. So the county municipal boards in Sweden will have to work according to the EU Floods Directive Formally, we are following it. In practice, not at all. But if we do all these things, I think flood risk can be more effectively mitigated.
If not addressed, this fragmentation causes a problem of fit that continues to undermine society's ability to anticipate and adapt to the expected escalation of flood risk in a changing climate. Addressing it is thus of fundamental importance for safety and sustainable development.